Is France becoming the new sick man of Europe? The crisis. No one expected. For decades, France has been viewed as a pillar of European stability, the EU's second-largest economy, a nuclear power, a diplomatic heavyweight, a country that prided itself on strong institutions and elite governance. But this week, an unthinkable question is spreading across Europe, whispered first behind closed doors and now openly across newspapers and TV studios. Is France becoming the new sick man of Europe? It sounds dramatic, even absurd at first. France, the same France that has always seen itself as the engine of Europe's political project, the same France that once lectured its neighbors about discipline, reform, and responsibility. Yes, that France. And what makes this story even more astonishing is who is asking the question. Because this time, the concern isn't coming from Germany, Britain, or the EU Commission. It's coming from Italy. Italy, a country known for governments so short-lived that prime ministers barely have time to hang their portraits on the wall. A country caricatured for decades as Europe's favorite problem child. And yet today, Italian newspapers are observing France with something they gleefully call malicious joy. To them, watching France stumble feels like watching the class prefect trip on his own shoelaces. But why? What changed? How did France, a country that symbolized European order, fall into such chaos? Let's break this down, because the reality is far more shocking than you might expect. A government in free fall. In less than 2 years, France has gone through 5 prime ministers. 5. Governments in Paris are collapsing so quickly that even Italy would raise an eyebrow. Worse, the French parliament, once dominated by stable political forces, is now split into 3 hostile and almost evenly matched blocks: the center, the left, and the right, or what many call the far right. Ever since Macron's disastrous snap elections in July 2024, these 3 groups have transformed parliament into a political battlefield. No one can form a lasting majority. No one can pass a budget. No one can govern. The national budget, one of the most fundamental tools a government needs, is stuck in limbo, because each bloc would rather tear down the others than compromise. For a country that has always prided itself on being the intellectual and administrative heart of Europe, this paralysis is unprecedented. But the political chaos is only the beginning. The debt spiral. France today is drowning in debt, not struggling, not pressured, drowning. The national debt has crossed 3 trillion euros, and the cost of servicing this mountain of debt is exploding at a terrifying pace. This year alone, France will pay 67 billion euros in interest, more than every government ministry except education and defense. Let that sink in for a moment. France now spends more money paying interest on debt than it does on health, transport, environment, industry, justice, or social development. And this is just the beginning. By the end of the decade, those interest payments could reach 100 billion euros per year. 100 billion. Every single year. And that money doesn't build schools, it doesn't modernize infrastructure, it doesn't support families or businesses, it doesn't prepare France for the future, it simply vanishes into the black hole of past borrowing. This is the definition of a fiscal trap. And the markets have noticed the downgrade that shook Europe. In late November, the rating agency Fitch delivered the blow everyone feared. It downgraded France's credit rating. The explanation was blunt, almost brutal. Markets are losing faith in France's ability to stabilize its finances and even its political system. This is extremely rare language for a major Western economy. It signals that investors believe France is drifting toward a dangerous place, a place Europe hasn't seen since the Eurozone crisis. Because the downgrade means something very simple. Borrowing becomes more expensive. And when borrowing becomes more expensive, the debt grows even faster. And when the debt grows faster, markets panic again. This is a vicious cycle, one that countries like Greece, Portugal, and Italy know far too well. But here's the shocking part. French bonds are now considered riskier than the bonds of Greece, Portugal, and Spain, the very countries France once lectured about responsibility. That is how far the perception of French stability has fallen. A crisis in a dangerous world. None of this is happening in peaceful times. The West's proxy war against Russia and Ukraine continues to drain resources. The United States is shifting its global priorities under Trump. Populist movements across Europe are feeding on economic anxiety. And many countries are preparing for major geopolitical realignments. In this storm, Europe desperately needs strong anchors. But instead, France, one of its strongest pillars, is suddenly the weakest link. Some economists in Brussels and Berlin are whispering the unthinkable. Could France need intervention from the IMF or the European Central Bank? A decade ago, this would have been dismissed as a joke. Today, it is part of serious financial modeling. How did France fall this far, this fast? To answer that, we need to go back to the moment everything broke. The summer of 2024, Macron's gamble. Frustrated by political gridlock, President Macron made a bold decision in 2024. He dissolved the National Assembly and called snap elections. His strategy was simple: force voters to choose stability and strengthen his position. But voters didn't strengthen him, they shattered parliament instead. France emerged with three hostile camps, each powerful enough to block the others, but not powerful enough to govern. It was the perfect recipe for paralysis. And from that moment, France entered a downward spiral. Because when no one can govern, nothing gets fixed. The unfixable budget. Let's talk about France's spending. France spends more on social protection than almost any country on earth, about 30% of GDP. It has one of the world's most generous pension systems. It heavily subsidizes unemployment, childcare, transportation, healthcare, education, energy. The list goes on. During the pandemic, France spent billions shielding businesses and households. After Europe cut itself off from Russian energy, France spent billions again to cushion the shock. The tax burden is already among the highest in Europe, around 45.6% of GDP. Raising taxes further is political suicide. Cutting spending is equally explosive. When Macron tried to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, something nearly every other developed country has already done, France exploded in the largest protests of his presidency. Even tiny cuts to fuel subsidies can bring taxi drivers into the streets and paralyze city centers. So what's the solution? More spending? Impossible. More taxes? Impossible. More borrowing. Downgrades make that dangerous. Structural reform. Parliament cannot agree on lunch, let alone reform. This is the definition of a trap. The political war consuming France. The French political class is not focused on solutions. It is locked in a bitter ideological war. The left demands more spending. The right rejects austerity but also opposes tax hikes. The center cannot govern without choosing one of the two. And neither side will cooperate. The result? Paralysis. And markets absolutely hate paralysis. The irony is striking. France is now seen as more unstable than Italy, even though Italy has a larger debt load. Why? Because Italy has something France does not, a government that can actually govern. The dark cloud of 2027, then arrives the most destabilizing factor of all, the presidential election of 2027. If the right wins and implements even half of its spending promises, the debt could explode. If the left wins and expands social spending, the debt could explode. If the center somehow survives but remains blocked in parliament, the paralysis continues, and the debt still explodes. Analysts warn that 2027 could be a moment of reckoning for France, a moment when markets stage a full-blown revolt. But beyond the numbers, the greater danger is psychological. France risks entering a long, drifting decline. A country with immense strength but no ability to use it. A country paralyzed by chaos, impotence, and debt. A country trapped by its own contradictions, too generous to cut spending, too exhausted to raise taxes, too indebted to borrow, too divided to reform, too politically fractured to govern. In other words, the perfect storm. Is France really the new sick man of Europe? Some analysts insist France will muddle through, that it is too central, too wealthy, too important to fail. They point to its infrastructure, its institutions, its industrial base. Maybe they're right, but others see something far more ominous. A nation heading toward the very fate it once mocked in others. A France slowly sliding into the same category as the countries it used to warn, judge, and lecture. A France that could become the new sick man of Europe. After Germany, only time will tell how this story ends. But one thing is certain, Europe is watching, the markets are watching, and the world is watching too. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what your thoughts are. Is France truly heading toward a crisis, or will it find a way to pull itself back from the edge? If you're watching from France, your perspective is incredibly important. Share your experience below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel grow. Bye for now.